You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 185 of Arsenal Pass. We are on the eve, well actually no, we're not, because new schedule. We're dropping this on day one of the World Championships here in Osaka. I'm clearly in Osaka with Pankaj. We are pre-recording this episode in anticipation of our travels that are about to come, and we're going to talk all things preview for the World Championship. Pankaj is going to grill me on my deck choice and do, you know what Brendan would always do, tell me I'm probably going to audible anyway. And so, actually, in preparation for that, Pankaj, I sent you 2 deck lists in case I do decide to audible, right? Which we're going to talk through. And then, yeah, a bit of preview for the World Championships. And, yeah, what else? What else have I missed that we're going to cover today?
So my goal is to make you audible to the third deck list.
That
a third choice that you're just going to come up with on the spot, because I'm going to make you feel terrible about all your deck choices over here. But other than that, no, I don't think we've missed anything. There's no new news, obviously, because yeah, we are pre-recording this. And Week in Flesh and Blood is the same as the previous episode.
Yeah, we literally recorded last week's episode yesterday and this week's episode today. And we've also done a little bit for next week's episode after this. It's all a bit confusing, but you'll hear the pods come out. They'll make sense. It'll all be fine. No issues. But we do have a Commander Cookout question. If you want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, please do so. You can drop a comment in the YouTube video below. Let us know your question is for the Commander Cookout. You can email us at arsenalpassfab@gmail.com, or if you are an Arsenal Pass patron, you can drop it in the Discord, as Fancy has done here. I was saying to Pankaj, Fancy is a regular questioner on the Commander Cookout section, at least had a couple, and Fancy asks this. In Flesh and Blood, there are 3 kinds of decks: Guardian, Illusionist, and Aggro. Design mistakes. Okay, good to know. Aggro design mistakes. Brute is a bad Guardian. Mech is a bad Illusionist, except when it's an aggro design mistake. Kano is an aggro design mistake with a Guardian switchboard. Nu is such a good Guardian that all other Guardians are now retroactively bad Guardians. So no question there, but we get to the question, what will be the first class that breaks this cast iron rule of design? You know what? How do we want to approach this? First of all, Pankaj, thoughts on the statement that Fancy makes here around there being 3 kinds of decks?
Definitely quite hyperbolic. Hyperbolic? How do you pronounce the word? Anyway, it's quite exaggerated, I think. I think there's more than just those 3 kinds of decks. Especially once you get into mech, right? It's calling mech a bad illusionist, except with aggro design mistake, but it kind of like does both and kind of can also place like somewhere in the middle. So really quite hyperbolic there. But to go with the spirit of the question, which is the first class that breaks this cast iron rule, I would say we already have a class that breaks it, and I'd put Warrior right there. I don't think Warrior is a Guardian, nor is an illusionist, and nor is it is definitely not aggro enough to be an aggro design mistake. So that'll be my answer to this question.
It's interesting. I'm going to read between the lines here, right? With Fancy's statement / question, and there is overlap, right? And if I look at if I wanted to boil it down to, don't worry about archetypes here, and basically what what Fancy's saying is there is, don't worry about class, but think about maybe kind of pieces of the game in terms of what each of these classes maybe play into the most, and I would call that, I guess, a aggressive or a damage dealing slant. I would call them a defensive leaning slant, and I would call them a board pieces slant, and then the other one, and then there's kind of a mix between all those things. Basically, you could do, put that on a triangle, and then you can sit somewhere in between, right? That's where your mid-range decks or your kind of like set up the combo decks sit. That's what I would say is kind of this design triangle that's being referred to. And yeah, I mean, there's going to be some overlap, right? Like there's going to be some stuff that there is some overlap, and I think there's more overlap in some pieces of this than others, which means that some of these classes, or at least particular heroes in these classes, see less play and will see less play, and I will agree on some of these. some have pushed the boat out too far on the piece of the triangle they play into, and others have not pushed it out enough, right? And drown effectively. You know, if it's, I don't know, let's use for example Olympia, for instance. If you want to talk about the maybe where that deck sits or where that hero sits in that triangle versus, you know, something like a Zen, for instance, on the other side. So I do think there's lots of different places you can play within that design pool. And I do think, though, that LSS have tried to go outside of that design pool while still staying true to the game. And I think, actually, I think Nu is a pretty good example of that. Like, it's a deck that kind of plays into all the pieces of that triangle, but does it in a unique way. So yeah, I don't know. I find it really interesting, the trajectory Flesh and Blood design has gone through, and I'm really interested to see what happens now that we've had all these card bannings as to where they take things next with a bit more of, I guess, an open playing field, less restrictions. I don't know. What do you think, Pankaj?
Referring to a triangle, I think makes a lot of sense. I think in particular, we have had a lot of metas that kind of follow this triangle structure, with usually an illusionist at one of the points of it and an aggro deck at the other point of it. Usually the third deck, though, it kind of pivots between Guardian / whatever is preying on the aggro deck, which is kind of like still filling that same role. So I'm definitely with you there, where the triangle aspect, and obviously the question as well implies this, that it just exists in the game. But I think with how creative they've been with the overlaps that you're referring to, and the sort of classes that can accompany more than one of these points in a triangle, I think we're well past these are the only three kinds of decks in Flesh and Blood. I think Nu is an excellent example, as you were talking about. It does have a combo aspect as well as like the Guardian-esque aspect. I think Warriors as well, you know, they're kind of aggro leaning-ish, where it's like their game plan revolves around them getting their on-hits off. They're kind of Guardian-esque in that they block very well, and they're also kind of Illusionist-esque in that typically when their game plan is succeeding, there is a board state happening. There's Dawnblade counters, there's currency in the field. Even Kasai is actually literally raising allies as well, right? So it's the overlap is now so deep and complex that we're well past just having three simplistic points in a triangle, I'd say.
Yeah, it's almost like if you lay down a triangle, and that's the fundamental bedrock of the design, and you layer another triangle on top, which is hero design, and then you just turn it ever so slightly, and then it's one hero. You turn it ever so slightly, that's another hero. You know, like, I think that is kind of what's happening a little bit in Flesh and Blood. And the reason I chose this question, for hyperbole aside and all these things, and just funny question, is actually, I think what happens next in Flesh and Blood design is really interesting. And I think we're coming to, well, as this pod drops, the World Championship is about to happen. I think you're going to see, to be honest, a fair representation of what Fantasy is saying to a degree. You know, I think there is, you're going to see a fair representation of what Illusionist does this weekend. I think you're going to see a fair representation of what Aggro does. My question would be is, like, in this scenario, what is the Guardian in this meta right now? Is it actually just the Illusionist, or is it actually new, like Fancy saying, or is there something else happening? I think this meta is quite interesting because I don't think we have a natural predator to the aggro decks necessarily, and I think that's maybe the first time we haven't really had that. And you could say, yeah, maybe Victor is that, but some of these aggro decks kind of almost, again, splash outside of some of these things, and then you've got to compete with the news of the world and have to deal with Enigma. So yeah, we're going to talk about predictions, but one of the predictions I'm really interested to hear from you, Pankaj, once we get into it, and maybe have a think about this. I specifically want to know how much Victor is going to show up. If you can have a stance on that, that'd be great.
I'll prelude, I guess, my answer once we get into the main topic by saying I don't think Victor is going to be very well represented or a very good choice for this upcoming tournament. But yeah, I think this meta is actually a very, very good example of kind of the hyperbole behind this question, right? We really don't have a Guardian-esque thing. Actually, Enigma is sort of holding that role, kind of, partially. But I would say Nu is also relevant in the meta. She's like, you know, we spoke about this last week, like one of the top 6 decks. That's my view on it. I think she's sort of holding that pole as well, but she's also not exactly super Guardian-esque. So yeah, I think this is a great example of how these decks have started moving away from these pillars of the fundamental design.
Yeah, what do you think? Where do you think Kano sits in this? And I maybe, you know, pre-book banning Kano, like Kano, when it's been at its, I guess its prime in some ways, has been this almost just exclusively combo-based deck.
Well, it's clearly an aggro design mistake, right? It feels like if you had to pick one of these three, I think Kano is like kind of firmly in that one, especially pre-book ban, right? Which is what you mentioned. He basically kind of was the arcane version of Zen in a sense. Maybe not quite that level of consistent, but definitely that level of explosive, and sometimes can even gets there without the setup that Zen needs, right? Of like transcending or something. So he's there, but then I think the question in the statement before the question itself, it was also alluded to the Guardian switchboard with the whole inevitable pitch stack plan. So if I had to pick out one of the three, I'd say he fell under aggro design mistake, but also it's like the Venn diagram, right? He's holding both. He's kind of aggro design mistake, but also I have this combo inevitability, so maybe I'm a Guardian.
Yeah, I mean, this is the key design principles of the game. You're going to really struggle to ever see anything that either doesn't have a damage dealing slant, doesn't have a defensive leaning slant, or doesn't have some sort of setup or non-interactivity in some ways, or board presence, right? And I think if that ever happens where, we have alternate win conditions, because I think that's basically at that point you're getting into alternate win conditions. Like, what does a hero do that... And I think you'd then start to be looking at things like maybe Merchant.
Regicide.
Regicide, sure, yeah. But that's still achieved through dealing damage, right? Like, what does the shell of that hero look like? And I think at some point it might be more like, what does building towards a different win condition? And honestly, I really hope Flesh and Blood don't. It has to be very, very well done, because other games have tried to do that and it is often a mess. Alternative win conditions. But yeah, I think there is possibility that's where you start to look. Mech, Bard, I don't know. Those are probably two of the heroes that come to mind.
I'd say the closest thing to an alternate win condition we have right now is Fatigue, which I think actually this meta, I mean, CYB is quite a bit of a talk of the town, right? And that is literally his win condition. Like the CYB Enigma lists, the whole way it wins is running you out of damage by gaining life more than you can deal damage and blocking out, and then just killing you with a free weapon with a Spectral Shield at the end, right? That's the closest thing we have. And yeah, I think they're intentionally being very, very careful with other alternate win conditions, right? Regicide's, I think, the only one we have seen so far.
Yeah,
I think that could, But I wouldn't mind seeing some other ones. I find them quite exciting. Like when I first saw Regicide, I loved the flavor of it, and I think it knocked out of the park for me in terms of the flavor and the design of it, and how much you had to work to really get to the point, and the fact that that's such a devastating fail case, right, where you lose the game on the spot. I definitely understand the fear behind alternate win conditions, but I definitely trust them to do it well when it does come out and maybe becomes a little more prevalent than Regicide.
Yeah. Interesting. And I guess the other reason I chose this question as well is that we the World Championship is basically going to wrap this season, right? We've had the ProQuest season. The horizon now is January for our next set, and to maybe what the design. I mean, this is going to be the first set they release post all the. I mean, Rosetta, I guess, coincided, but there's a lot of, I guess, design philosophy and things that we might start to see around the the card advantage element that has been banned out of the game. So I'm really excited to see what that means for some of the design elements. With that said, yeah, if you want to get your questions in for the Commander Cookout, please do so. We're going to move on to the main topic, Pankaj. And where do you want to start? Do you want to start with Worlds, metagame predictions, format predictions, result predictions? Should we start there, and then we can get into whatever the heck I'm playing?
Yeah, let's put some numbers down. Let's talk about representation. Let's say top 3. We can put predictions down for that, and then I guess it would be. I don't think this is going to be a Worlds prelude without us predicting the top 8, right? So we have to predict the heroes in the top 8.
Gosh. Okay. All right. You lead us away. Where do you want to start? Meta predictions or?
All right. Yeah. Let's go meta predictions. So I think this one shouldn't be too much of a surprise. Most represented hero Enigma. But I think the percentage here, there is stuff to talk about. In the past, at least the past few recent metas, even what is considered to be most busted deck, didn't have like an obscenely large representation, compared to like some other TCGs, for example. People in Flesh and Blood do really like playing, the hero that they really want to play. I think the most in the recent years, the most we've had is like 25%-ish, like in that sort of
Lexi.
area. Maybe maybe Lexi was
24 and a
30.
half,
I don't quite remember.
Nah, 24 and a half.
24 and a half. Yeah. Yeah, so not that high. But we are at the moment right now where the best deck isn't that far ahead of the next best deck. So the percentage for Enigma's representation is, I think, something interesting to talk about. I am going to put it at 18%.
So you think there's kind of no argument that Enigma is going to be, like, you would be deeply, deeply shocked if right now, today, while you're sitting in the booth and people are taking the lunch break to listen to the podcast, or they've just listened to the podcast and now they're watching the coverage, that Enigma is not the most played deck?
Deeply shocked is maybe too exaggerated, but I definitely will be surprised. I think... Yeah, I mean, Illusion has always been popular. We spoke about this a few weeks ago, where she's been super well represented, even when she shouldn't have been, like Amsterdam. But now that she is supposed to be well represented, yeah, I expect her to be the most represented.
Okay, me too. No, me too.
Okay,
me too.
Yeah.
I have her sitting around 20 to 22%. I think I actually there was a time when I thought Enigma was going to be close to the Lexi levels of play, and we're talking Lexi because, as a good comparison, Starvo I believe was 30% of the meta at Pro Tour 1, but that is a massive outlier. So we will use, I think, Lexi as more of a strongest format versus even Zen last time was around 22-23%. So for reference, so I think Enigma is going to be below Zen in terms of representation, but not much. I think around that 20. High, peaking at 22%, I think, but I could see Enigma going as low as 18, depending on what people decide to do.
Yeah, so I was going by Zen's numbers as well. I think, with Zen being at the 22-ish%, I don't think Enigma is quite at that same power level as Zen was at the time, and I also think there's going to be enough Enigma players who are a little bit nervous about the expected aggro representation, particularly Auroras and Viscerais. The Dios, I think you can form a good plan around it. Zen can be a little iffy as well, but we are sort of in a meta where there are very many viable aggro decks. And so, yeah, that's why Enigma slightly lower, but still most represented. But I'm going to stick with 18.
Okay, I'm going to go 20.5. There you go. I'm gonna split some amount of difference and be a contrarian. I guess it's
All right.
Yeah, you're gonna note this down, are you?
Oh yeah, we should actually. All right, okay. So now you can do the second place.
All right, I have second place. I have Aurora, just Aurora. I think, had you asked me maybe not last week, but the week before, maybe a week and a half ago, I would have said it was Dash.io. I think it's Aurora now, and I have Aurora at around 15 to 16%.
Well, I have Aurora second too, and also at 15%. I think. Yeah. Why don't you elaborate first on why?
Yeah, I think Aurora is establishing itself as the potential best counter to the best deck, I think, in terms of the way it lines up. I think like we talked about multiple times in the last few weeks, it's really hard to target as well. So I think it's the most robust aggro deck. A lot of the other aggro decks are, like Zen, like Aurora itself, can freely throw in Warmonger's Diplomacy, right? That card has a massive impact on the meta right now. I think it's obviously having a massive, even just, obviously Enigma's running that as well. So I think Aurora is the deck that doesn't get hit by that and is still a good damage dealing aggro deck, resilient, and plays really well into most builds of Enigma if you have the right setup, I think. I won't say it's a free matchup, and I think it can even verge on a bad matchup depending on how both sides set up. Which is a very interesting piece, which we'll get into, I think, when we talk about more about Enigma and things like that. But there's, I think there's two distinctive ways to be building Enigma right now. Like you say, count your blessings or not, and they have different matchup spreads.
That was some light foreshadowing about us discussing our list very, very soon. I have Aurora as next rep because I'm kind of just going off PQ results here. I think historically, PQ results before the major have been quite indicative of what's going to be popular at the major.
Yeah. And
with Aurora having as many wins as she does at this point, kind of matching Enigma. I don't remember if it's slightly higher, slightly lower at this point. They're basically at the same. So I have a second most represented, not quite Enigma level, simply because Illusionist players are going to be Illusionist players and just play the deck. She doesn't quite have that same following. She obviously has been out for less as well. But she's, I think, the default aggro deck, if you will. Sort of like the Fi of like 2 years ago. Like when he first came out, he's kind of just like the de facto linear aggro deck that does the thing, and other people need to have answers for it. I have in that category, and she's very strong. She's good into most the regular Enigma builds, if you will, who's expected to be most represented. So yeah, a good old 15%. Now, number 3, I think this is the one where we start to reach the waters of number 3 and 4 are going to be like so close to each other that we're kind of flipping coins as to what's going to be here. But I'll start us off here, and my guess is going to be Dash.io. I think if you asked me last week, it would have been Viscerai. But I think sentiment around Viscerai has been falling a little. I think similar to the Dash.io thing, where it's like the cracks are starting to show, the inconsistencies are starting to show. Other people are starting to develop game plans for you, and then just casually getting hit by warmongers that people are bringing in for Dio, and you're kind of just not feeling super great. And Dio, on the other hand, is like people are starting to get better at the deck, right? We touched on this last week as well, where it's like people need to get better at it and playing against it. And people were definitely getting better playing against it, but I think we're starting to see a bit of the counter of it, where Dios are starting to figure out strategies for fatigue, starting to put in the plasma main lines, for example, or system resets even, and they're figuring those kind of plans out. And I think there's enough skill expression in this deck that's just going to be quite appealing to really good players, the kind of players that want to show up at the World Championships. That I'm going to put Dio at 3rd with oh man, this percentage is so hard actually. Let's do 10%. I'm going to Dio at 10%.
I also think IO is going to be the 3rd most played for very similar reasons. I think the other reason I would say is that, like Enigma, and this is something I really want to dive into, I think the time to dive into it might be when we talk about deck selections, and also some decks that I decided not to play for various reasons. That I think there is also 2 particular kind of almost... unlike Enigma, where there's 2 clear, I think, archetypes almost, and big impacts on your deck selection, there's almost 2 sort of philosophies, I think, on the way to play and to sideboard and to try and attack different, particularly Enigma with Dash.io. So I have Dash.io at 13%. I think it's actually pretty... I think it's more close to 2nd than it is 4th for me.
Oh, okay. Very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
We will see how that shakes out. I'm gonna be keeping a very close eye to the matchup spread the moment we get it. I'm gonna be bugging Ethan about it the entire time.
Just to prove you're right.
Yeah, and if I'm wrong, I'm just gonna like not tell you.
I'll see it. Number 4.
Oh, we're gonna move to number 5.
Yeah, let's go all the way to 5. I think. Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay.
Because we've got to split the difference if we're too close. We're pretty close on 1, 2, and 3. So let's try and see if we can get a... yeah, right. I think we're about to find a difference at number 4. So here we go.
Oh, yeah. So my number 4 is going to be Viscerai. He's popular. He's good. He's been putting up some results as well. Oh, hang on. I just thought about Florian.
Interesting.
Oh, man. I just thought about... damn. Is it Viscerai? Is it Florian? I'm going to stick with Viscerai. I think in general, just... better to stick with the more aggressive leaning of the heroes if I'm tied between 2. So for Viscerai, I'm gonna go 8%.
Okay, deal. I'm gonna take Florian at 9.
All right.
I think Florian is gonna be. I think I agree with you from my. So I spent a lot of time digging into data in previous Pro Tours and Worlds, and yeah, a lot of PQ data often lines up. It's really, we have this shift where over the last 3 tier 4 events we haven't had the representation like we did in the events beforehand for the ProQuest data. So that is actually might be 4 now. This will be the 4th time. So it has shifted slightly because some of the results can be a little bit polarizing, especially in maybe smaller markets or where heroes or classes are more represented, but maybe don't turn out as well in terms of the results. So that's interesting. Also, we have a tier 4 event in Japan, and a part of the world we haven't had a tier 4 event before. I think US, Europe, there's some little bit of bias, and also this might be shaping up to be the biggest tier 4 event we've had. A lot of people redeeming PTIs, a lot of people planning to be here for this kind of 5-year spectacle. So I honestly think if anything, I might be a bit high on my numbers just overall. Like Enigma is the most played, even at 20% might just be too much, right? Because we're just going to see a flatter distribution spread. But anyway, back to Florian. It has been having... we talked about the trajectory on last week's episode of Florian and its growth and its performance. And I'm just going to go out on a limb and say I think that might translate to how much we see it show up. But I think it's a bit of a riskier call. But, to be honest, actually, the deck that... and I can segue into 5th here. If I wasn't going to choose Florian, I actually think I might have had Zen next on the board, very closely with Viserai. Like Zen, Viserai, Florian for me are the next group of decks that are all sitting around each other, I think.
I think Zen and Florian both have a similar quality of what I mentioned earlier about high-level players being attracted to these decks. I think Zen and Florian both have that. They both have can sort of like a hybrid between a defensive and an aggressive shell, and the deck building lets you really leverage that flexibility. You can push either one of them very far in one direction or the other. Like we've seen Zen lists come up with like wax on, wax offs, for example. I mean, I don't think it's super consistent, to be honest. But that option is then Flick Flax, obviously, which is a very powerful defensive ninja tool.
Yeah.
Florian as well. We spoke a little bit about Dennis Zhang's PQ Florian winning Florian list,
yep.
Which has like CMHs and pummels. But then, of course, there's the previously popular Florian list, which were a little bit more defensive, a little more stocked up on the non-attacks that block 3, for example. So, yeah, lots of flexibility there. So I'm definitely with you on Florian and Zen being attractive to the sort of player that's expected to play at the World Championships. Also want to touch a little bit on the flatter matchup spread. That's something we've definitely noticed in this game, where it's like even the best deck is just never as well represented as you expect it to be.
Or should be.
It just goes back to people just, have very strong ties to their heroes, right? I mean, it's going to be those Josh Laos of the world that will just play the warrior no matter what. To some extent, like the Sam Sutherlands of the world, they'll just play their mech, like no matter what, So the Ben Dodds will just play the assassins. So a lot of that is going on. So yeah, which is also why like my guesses have been a little bit on the lower end. Like you notice, like I've always just chosen a bit of a smaller number. Okay, so number 5 then. So I've got Zen, Nu, or Florian. Or potential number 5. Nu is probably a lot of my personal bias showing here, but I do think she is well positioned. Florian or Zen. I'm gonna knock Zen down a little. So it's not Zen. It's between Florian and Nu for me. You know what? I'm just gonna stick to what I would play, and I'm gonna guess Nu at 5.
All right.
Nu at 5th. But very, very close to Viserai. I'm gonna put her at 7.5%.
All right, fair enough. I'm gonna take Zen then at 5 at a similar 7. I said 7 to 8, so call the difference 7.5% as well. There you go.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I think the 4th and the 5th are definitely very, very close to each other.
All right. Couple of questions to follow up on this then. Nu, I do think will be around 5% of the meta. I think it probably comes in around number... Where do I have it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have it at 6 currently. Can I count? I'm really struggling with mathematics there. Yeah, I have it at 6/7 basically. Yeah, 7 actually.
Yep.
What about Kano? What percentage do you think people are going to show up with Kano?
Like really, really low.
Okay.
I think like that's not even a percentage anymore. I just want to give you a number at that point. Like these many Kano players are going to be in the room.
Call your shot. Call your shot.
Yeah, okay, so let's see. I do agree with you, we expect this to be a little bit bigger in terms of Tier 4 events in the past. I think particularly the promos at this event, right? The Japanese alt arts of a bunch of awesome heroes, the Ira, stuff like that. It's quite attractive to people. Also, the 5th year celebration. Also, is Japan just such an attractive destination. So I'm gonna put it the number of players somewhere between like 450 to 500.
Yeah, I have some. I have about 500. Yeah.
Yeah. So out of that, how many Brave Souls would play Kano? I mean, I want to say 10.
Okay.
I'm just gonna go with 10 again for that. Same as like my Dash Eye prediction a while back.
I think 16.
16. Okay. Yeah.
I think it's about 3.5 to 4%. On the high side, 4%.
Okay.
I think it's a decent amount of Kanos. I think it's going to pick up popularity with those Kano players and with people making... I think there's a lot of audibles that are going to happen in this last week, and I think a few people will find themselves sleeving up the wizard cards, and it won't be for Verdants, I'll tell you what. So, yeah, there you go.
I have been hearing rumblings of people starting to cut their AB as they try and figure out their slots for like Dash.io versus like Aurora and stuff. I think those people are starting to look at those AB pieces as very, very cuttable in the list, and that's perfect for Kano's players to strike. So,
and it's only it's only 8 rounds. Wait, they've changed the format now. It's 8 rounds of or is there an extra round of CC now? It's 9 now, right?
Yeah, they added an extra round of CC, so it's 9.
Yeah, so there is a bit more waiting on CC this time, which is relevant.
Yeah.
But you know what? You 7-2 and 6-0 you draft, and you get to go. Yeah, very good. All right. Any other call-outs you want to make? The reason I asked about Victor is I have Victor at around 2%. I think there's some people who will pick up Victor really thinking that maybe even like Enigma might start to drop off as people pick up Aurora and even things like Dash.io really start to pick up, and people might try and counterpick the aggro decks. I don't know if that's actually going to happen. I don't think it's particularly good. I definitely thought about it though. I'll tell you what. But I'm not gonna do it.
It's wild that you think Kano's going to be more represented than Victor. I definitely disagree with that. I think Victor will be more represented than Kano. So you had Kano at about like 4%, but Victor's at 2%.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to guess Victor's to be in the 3 to 4% range.
Okay, so swap them basically.
Basically. I'm going to go with Victor at 4 feels too high. Let's go 3.5. I'm gonna say it's 3.5%.
All right. We'll see what happens. I think just lastly on any kind of like predictions, things like that. Do you think there's a question for you? Do you think we'll see any particular strategies in draft that we haven't yet seen for Rosetta? Do you think people are tucking away any strategy? James White alluded to a particular strategy in Limited potentially that people hadn't picked up on yet. Do you think we might see some new strategies we haven't seen yet?
I must have misheard or misremembered that interview, because I thought when he was speaking about an undiscovered archetype, I don't know why I thought he was talking about CC.
Oh, was he? I thought it was
Limited. I don't remember. I've heard other people say Limited as well, so I must have been the one who just misheard. I don't think so. I think the player base has gotten large enough and honestly good enough as well that something like this can't really be kept secret for too long.
Yeah.
Like maybe amongst like people who don't practice that much, but amongst the top players, I think it'll be. I think generally people know what the good strategies are. Like in Amsterdam, for example, we had the draft of the Mystic Zen, right? That was like the Mystic Zen that was doing very well, and there was a draft we were following. And the YouTube chat was kind of just like, "Oh man, this is such a mid Zen deck," whereas people who had practiced a lot of the draft were like, "Oh wait, no, this is an awesome Zen deck."
Yeah.
So there might be some strategies that are a little bit more hidden from like not the top players.
Yeah.
But I think I don't expect something groundbreaking.
I drafted this morning. I drafted the like low to no Earth Florian Runeblade deck, like the Arcane Florian deck, and I think that deck is actually pretty good. That archetype, you just have to get a good number of Rune Ranger swarms and meet and greets. So it can be a train wreck if it doesn't come together. It's a risky strategy, that one.
Yeah, the more Runeblade leaning Florian, right? I mean, didn't Lucas win the world premiere calling on a similar list? Like he didn't decompose. He didn't have any decompose.
Okay, I actually wasn't sure. Yeah,
it was very similar. Maybe it was a bit more on like the 3-for-7s and a few on like specific Runeblade cards. But yeah, it's a similar vibe of, oh, my hero doesn't have an ability. I'm just Earth Runeblade. That's all that matters.
My feeling is that the weapon is just so good. Like if you can just consistently be 2-carding, 3-carding into your weapon, and be able to use your hand if you're playing against wizards, that's a very strong archetype to be in. I mean, you'll get run over by the best Earth decks, I think, but I think I think the rest you will beat. So I don't know. What do you think else you want to touch on Worlds meta? I mean, we need to make our top 8 predictions. Maybe we should end on the top 8 predictions, though.
Yeah, we'll end on top 8 predictions.
Okay.
I just want to give one shout out to a particular player who I'm really rooting for, and I think this will be his break, and that's Alan Lau from Blue Pitch.
Yeah.
Past 2 World Championships, he's come so close. It was like 9th in the first one, and then 12th in the second one, just like in the top 16, just like bubbled. And I personally think he's an exceptional player that just hasn't quite broken the top 8 yet. I'm really rooting for him, so I just want to give him a shout out.
Do you know what's crazy? So people talk about like, oh, Worlds, Barcelona, Blue Pitch, this rise of Blue Pitch. I don't think people realize this, but the first ever Worlds, Alan came 9th and Xing came 13th.
Yeah, no, they are insane players. Yeah. It's just,
yeah,
they're actually as exceptional in all of this world. So
I feel like we don't talk enough about top 16s and cash finishes in this game and consistency. And maybe I'm biased because I've got 2 PT top 16s, but I do think it does show consistent. Not selfishly, but I do think it shows consistency. You look at people like the Alan Laos of the world, like the Shings of the world, and these people who have not just necessarily top 8 but also top 16s. There's someone, Ian Zhang of the world, right, who have made multiple top 16s at PTs, including a top 8. So, wait, Ian's made a top 8, right? I think.
At PT, I think it was PT Lil.
Yeah. Definitely, definitely top 16s.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I would just one more shout out. You've got my main man on here. You got Bartosz Demba on there, who is one of my favorite people, and 2-time PT second placer, but also just recently top 8 a calling, top 4 at the calling, I think. So Bartosz, I think, is just one of the best players in the world, and yeah,
right up there. I mean, you spoke about consistency, and getting second place twice at a pro tour at that level is just absolutely incredible. I'm also going to give a shout out to this other guy and some people might know him. He goes by the name Hayden Dale. I've heard he's pretty good at the game as well. I'm going to give him a shout out as well and wish him all the best. I think this could definitely be your break.
Really? You're looking at my list and you're like, maybe. It depends which one he plays.
Which of the two, which are notable. But no, honestly, as you said, you have been incredibly consistent as well. So I think in terms of players to watch out for, you are definitely on the list as well.
Oh, thanks, Pankaj. I appreciate it. Anyway, should we move on to testing, deck selection? What do you want to grill me with? Where do you want to start?
All right, so I've got Hayden's Enigma list pulled up here. His current draft of the World's Enigma list. Now, just a reminder, we are recording this a full week before Worlds. There's still 1 full week of testing left to go.
Yeah.
So I'm going to touch on a bit of the card choices and ask you about it. But of course, anyone can expect there's going to be multiple changes potentially, and maybe even a change to a completely different hero.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that in a bit. But let's start with why Enigma.
Yeah, I think I've been pretty clear in the past few weeks. I've talked about thinking Enigma is the best deck in the format. I don't traditionally like playing the best decks in the format. I usually like to be the targeter, not the targeted. That's, I like to be the one trying to adapt to the meta as opposed to probably being the front runner in a meta deck. Probably the exception to that is that I've played Dromai when it's been good, I guess. But in saying that, I think basically my whole testing process has revolved around what I think. At the time, I guess I thought it was really clear that the 2 most powerful heroes in the format were Enigma and Dash.io, with Aurora kind of being one of the best decks and then behind that, but the 2 heroes that had the most upside, I think. So my kind of view was, okay, what can I play that I feel can definitely has a good matchup into Enigma and IO, and is fundamentally just strong, and honestly I just couldn't find anything that resonated with me that I felt was what did that. So I went through a testing process of like the Viserai I was trying, and it's like depending on how strategies line up, and it's not particularly good into IO. I've tried a range of things, I think, and I think ultimately what I decided is that I want to give myself the best chance and just play the most powerful strategy, I think, in this current metagame, which is to pick up and play Enigma.
Sounds good. I think Enigma is obviously a very, very solid pick for all the reasons you just listed. Let's go ahead and talk about the weapons you have selected in this Enigma list. And yes, weapons plural. So you have Cosmo, which makes sense. That's just kind of standard weapon. But talk to me about Reality Refractor. Why is this in the list?
Yeah, so Reality Refractor, I think, really interesting. We did a gameplay series on the Arsenal Pass YouTube channel when Dusk Till Dawn came out, and Nick Butcher played a prison list with Reality Refractor, and I remember him throwing it together, and we played the games, and I was like, wow, this weapon's actually really powerful. And it maybe wasn't quite the right fit for Prism, obviously, once the new Numenaris, as people like to say, the new Luminaris came out. But we saw Matt Rogers he was on the pod a few weeks ago, and he took to Leon and played Enigma and played Reality Refractor, and his list is out there on his Fab with Matt channel. And I think Reality Refractor is a really powerful weapon, particularly, I think, into Aurora, to change up your strategy, I think, a little bit, because I think you need to, and into things like Canoe. Basically, decks that can poke damage and clear, where you can't really set up a board, so you're not going to get the value out of Bell, and instead you can get the value out of doing things like playing, you know, a 2-card 9, pitch your blue, play your spectral manifestations, and swing for 8, and then still have a shield left behind. And if it ever survives 2 turns, then you're obviously in a really, really strong spot. So I think that's basically the reason for me of playing that weapon.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's hard for you to leverage the go again, which is a big part of Cosmos text. It's hard for you to leverage that against a deck like Aurora or, you know, some builds of Doom as well, which are kind of constantly keeping your board clear.
Yeah.
As you said, you know, they poke at you and then your board is not clear. So you just want to get, you want to, the few times you do get one aura, you want to smack really hard with it, and you don't really care about the action point afterwards. I want to talk about cost curve, though. You spoke about spectral manifestations, and yeah, that cost curve works very well with Reality Refractor. But what about, like, your chi, right? You make a shield off of Enigma. If you don't have Tunic, you're not really getting the Cosmo side of it, where you just make a chi, send 2, and then have one on the back. So where does chi land when you are on the Reality Refractor?
Yeah, I think you can cut back on. So I'm on I think currently on 7 Transcend. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, on the 7 Transcend build. I think you can cut back potentially a little bit, cut down to 5 to 6. Obviously, things like Sacred Art gets worse as well. You're basically not trying to amass a board, so I think you're just kind of living with the fact that you're either playing these value attacks with your auras, with your weapon, or you're playing cards like Phantasmaclasm and Mirage Metamorph and CNC and things like that. So I think you basically become this mid-range kind of control deck, and I think it definitely has its downsides, and I think if people are potentially prepared for it, it's a lot worse, I think, as well. So I'm not 100% sold on Reality Refractor. I think I'm like 90% that I'm going to play it, but I really, for me at the moment, I actually particularly like it. And so I know, like, some people in, for instance, the wider kind of like PCG Invasion team, which is a lot of the Canadians and stuff. I think like Aaron, who's top 8 Worlds competitor, for instance, I think he's playing in, you know, potentially more matchups. But I'm still early days on the refractor love. So yeah, there's definite downsides to it, and your cost curve is one of them for sure.
Yeah, and one other question I have about Refractor is Mirror Guy, right? Traverse into Mirror Guy,
so much worse.
Swing with it into Disruption is one of the most powerful things the Cosmo Enigma can do. And at least a lot of the games I've watched, where it seems like a lot of the games hinge around that turn cycle for the Enigma into Auroras, into News, for example. Because when you get to go Mirror Guy, Swing, and then CNC after that, or Phantasmaclasm after, like Send Disruption after, or like Warmonger's a Dio or Viscerai, for example, that can just feel kind of illegal and kind of just winning the game on the spot, which you don't have access to under Reality Refractor. So is it similar to the Chi thing as well, where it's just you're just doing you're getting a value completely elsewhere, and you're not really, the Traverse for Mirror Guy thing isn't that big a part of it?
Yeah, basically. And whether that's the right thing or not, I'm not 100% sold on just yet. I mean, it also makes cards like Restless Coalescence worse as well. So obviously defensively they're still good, but then you can't, you know, swing them, make the shield, swing the shield, for instance, things like that. So I'm not 100% sold, but I think one of the tough things about how those decks can really, if you're on the so just to be clear as well, this list is a non-Count Your Blessings Enigma list. The list will be down in the description. If for some reason I decide to either pivot off or play Count Your Blessings or anything like that, like, I'll also update in the description, and you'll be able to see that. But so whatever list you see that's down there is the list I'm playing, basically. But at this point in time, I'm not planning to play Count Your Blessings. And yeah, I think that is what you kind of, you lose access to. So you're playing a different style deck. Whether it's the right decision, maybe. Yeah,
I mean, it feels like your Tunic becomes like it's used differently, right? In the Cosmo list, you're kind of just, okay, Enigma, you make Mirror Guy, and after you Tunic the Mirror Guy, kind of you get those kind of plays. But in this one, we spoke about the Chi earlier, you get to Chi and then Tunic Send the Shield for 6, which is a lot. So you still have access to some really, really powerful plays, and you aren't beholden to needing a big board to do things like that. So that's really, really cool. Moving on to the main board over here, you mentioned Spectral Manifestations earlier, and you've got 3 copies of that. And you also have the 10Ks to go with this.
Yep.
let's talk about the 10K for a little bit, because that is quite contentious. I know some people might still like the spectral manifestations, but the 10K part, they're not super sold on it. So what are you sold on 10K?
I think it's the best play you can make in the mirror. I think with Mage Master boots and yeah, shout out to Aaron Shantz on that one, who's been a big proponent of that one. I think basically the mirror is honestly, for my taste, not a particularly enjoyable matchup. And so I'm down for having the biggest swing possible to just potentially snowball and swing that matchup. And I think if you can stabilize, or you kind of even get behind, and then you can Mage Master into a 10K, that's can be pretty devastating. So that's kind of I honestly, actually at this point, I don't particularly love it in a lot of other matchups. I think you have merit into things like, Guardian, for instance. Do you need help in that matchup? Probably not. Yeah, I think that's the primary use for that card is mostly for mirror. I honestly think, it's like, I think you have to make a decision. How big, if I think Enigma is the best deck in the format, how many people do I think are playing Enigma? We talked about 18 to 23%, right, respectively, between us. So how many cards do I want to dedicate to that matchup? I also think that we will see, we can do top 8 predictions, but I think we'll see Enigmas in top 8, and if I want to win a World Championship, then I'm gonna have to beat some Enigmas in a mirror match. So that's kind of my view.
Sure. Yeah, I see a lot of Enigma lists that are attacking a lot for all these other aggro decks and then sacrificing a little bit of the mirror, but most people on the same page, Enigma's going to be most represented, and you definitely need an answer for them. And I really like this idea of sort of, like, both Enigmas have the mirror guy package, right? Like they already have the mirror guys, the traverse, and all the cheese. And so both mirror guys have access to the potential high roll of just like naturally getting a mirror guy or just getting an early board. But you have a couple more pieces because you also have this 10K with the Mage Masters. So you just give yourself a little bit more of the edge, a little bit more of the probability that you can develop a bigger board or a board faster than they can. And then you snowball your way to victory, because that is how the Enigma mirrors go quite a lot of the time, right? The person who just gets the board first and is able to hold it is the one who wins.
And I think, like, a lot of the Enigma lists, there's a lot of overlap, right? And I think for me in testing, like, where I started was starting with like Pablo's list, and also from the other player that came top 4 at that event with Count Your Blessings, and then we saw some updated lists through the kind of season, the Liam Holden ProQuest list, for instance. All these things started to iterate and just play more games of Enigma, more different styles. And like I said, there's a bigger group who'd also been playing Enigma as well, and I think it just gets to the point where it's like, okay, the lists look like, there's a lot of like the core of these lists look very similar, but you have a few very key decision points. Some of them come in the blues you play and the philosophy behind which blues you play, and then some of them come in the kind of auxiliary reds and how you want to attack matchups. And I like to play Flesh and Blood very simply. I like to keep my game plans as clean as possible. I like 3-ofs. I like easy game plans. I like repeatable game plans. And I think, these pieces that enable that are the things I'm looking for. So, yeah.
Makes sense. So to go along with the 10Ks, you have 3 red astral etchings. I think that's been happening a lot in recent lists, even on non-10K lists. Just very, very strong card, especially with the new arms, which is pretty much what they're running these days. Just having a little combat trick, also very, very good in the mirror, as you're talking about. But you also have a couple copies of the yellow astral etchings. Now this, of course, you get 1 short of the 3 you need to play a 10K for free. If it's a chi, I guess you'll have your 3. But talk to me about why a couple of the yellows as well.
I had 3 in the list for a little bit. Was like playing 6 astral etchings. There was a ProQuest list. I can't remember the person's name, but they had 6 astral etchings. I was like, that's quite a cool idea. Tried it out, really liked them. I think they, being yellows, there's a bit of a liability there. I do think they are very good in the mirror in particular, though. Like you do want access to more than 3 astral etchings. And yeah, there's the 10K reunion aspect, but actually also there's just the awkward breakpoints factor. There's the pushing over. There's how insane Restless Coalescence is as a card as well, and the value on that card. So I think, honestly, I'd be surprised if most people, most groups, whatever, people testing them don't land on more than 3 astral etchings. To what number that is, and honestly, I have seen people play blue as well, which I don't love, but I think the average number of astral etchings in Enigma decks is probably going to be 4, honestly. I think that's where people will land, so yeah.
And do you ever bring the yellows into any matchup other than the mirror?
They block 3.
Okay, so you do. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
yeah. I haven't solidified all my matchup plans at this point, but yeah, they block 3, so I think they're coming in a reasonable number of, well, probably in like 30% of matchups, I guess, something like that.
Yeah. And now moving on, Essence of Ancestry Body has been showing up in pretty much all Enigma lists these days, mostly because of Dio. But it is a new inclusion as far as Enigma decks go, like, meta-wise. Previous meta, not really a card you see. I see Essence of Ancestry Body. Any other matchup other than Dio that you want this card in?
Yeah, I think this card's insane against all the aggro decks that want to go wide. Like, I think, it's like Viscerai, for instance, right? Like, you get to choose if it breaks on the arcane damage they deal, and yeah, they can play around it with like Ninth Blades and maybe swinging blue attacks and stuff, but so often if you're playing the non-CYB build, what they're going to try and do into you is just maybe chunk a bit of Rune Chance, but you can play auras in response, so they're going to be attacking basically every second turn for the most part, maybe sometimes every third turn, and it is quite hard for them to play around that card, and it often is going to represent for you a 0 card 6, and that is very strong. So yeah, I think the card's just very good against the aggro decks in the format. I think it's pretty good against things like Zen as well. I think it's pretty good against Aurora. Might be the one where it's pretty good against Aurora as well. Actually, it's just pretty good.
Yeah, all the aggro decks are going very, very wide, and I agree with you. This card has been very, very impressive in testing so far. Now, moving on to other defensive pieces, you have the Sinks and the Fates, pretty stock standard.
Yep.
Now, I think a lot of lists also coming on to adding a third playset of a D-React. I've been seeing all the lines, I've been seeing that all you got. You're on Flicker Trick.
Yeah.
So why Flicker Trick over the other defensive pieces you could have access to, like all the lions and that all got?
Yeah, I think this one's a newer one for me. This is probably one where I need to understand how much I like this card still. I've seen other people playing with it. I think, so my problem with Hold the Line is I think that card is actually so just inconsistent with turning it on. And yeah, it's great to be able to flip chi off of it, but when you're playing a non-CYB deck, you're not doing as much flipping of chi during your opponent's turn because you're not utilizing your resources to the fullest extent, I think, on your opponent's turn. So I think that card is a lot weaker in those situations. So I think basically you want to look for more of a solid defense reaction. I think Flicker Trick just kind of lines up quite well into the current meta. You think about something like a Zipper Hit, for instance. You can think about obviously it's always going to have the breakpoint on things like 0 to 60, etc. But there's a reasonable number of like 5 breakpoints that IO is going to throw at you. The one matchup where it's a liability, and this is why I think that I'm not sure that I'm going to run it, or I'm probably not going to run the full 3 copies. I could see myself probably registering 1 to 2. Is the Aurora matchup is just such a liability if they play Lightning Press, right? So, and I don't know if I have a risk tolerance for that or not. That's what I need to work out. And into Viscerai, if they ever get onto just like the swing 9th blade line for like 25 damage or something, you just have a card that does nothing. So, very good against Dash.io, but it's a lot more limited in the other matchups, and that's probably my decision point in the next week of what that means. I think if I wasn't going to play this, I think Oasis is the other one people play, but that's more the CYB builds because you can use your floating resource a lot more efficiently. What I might honestly end up doing is either just not playing an extra defense reaction. Or the other one I don't mind is That All You Got, because there's a lot, you've got Zen running around, you can always block the pistol on IO, and when you play non-CYB, I think IO is always going to pistol into you to push damage. So yeah, I think That All You Got is potentially reasonable, but Aurora as well, right? Always block the weapon, so I think that is maybe the replacement.
It's really cool the different equity these different D-Reacts have into like the different aggro. It's
really
matchups.
Cool.
So we spoke about the All You Got is actually going to Zen, Aurora, and Dio, not very good into Viscerai. And Flicker Trick is going to Viscerai, Zen, Dio, not very good into Aurora.
Yeah.
So it can maybe just end up being like what you predict is going to be more represented, and you want to D-React for that. But yeah, not many pumps going around this meta for Flicker Trick to be that much of a liability, except in the Aurora matchup, right?
And some people, from my understanding, not everyone's on Lightning Press, or not on 3 copies of Lightning Press, so yeah.
Dash.io with Tecto Pounder can maybe pose a bit of a problem, but I mean, you can just block something else, right? You don't need to block the one that was pumped by the Tecto Pounder. So yeah, that's a really cool inclusion that is not very, very common. The rest of the reds, pretty stock standard. You've got CNCs, you've got Miragings, Phantasmaclasms. Is there anything in particular you want to talk about those, or should we just move on? Because that is kind of stock standard. It's kind of
no, I think Phantasmaclasm is. Yeah. I think in this current meta, I think is 100% where you want to be. I know some people aren't super high on Phantasmaclasm. Yeah. Popper's numbers are really low, and I think just the disruption element to very specific hands that basically all the decks where you want to throw damage, Viserai, even if IO is on more of a setup plan and gives you the room, you throw a Phantasmaclasm, you take their high octane or something out of their hand. It can really be important. So yeah, I think the card's very good.
I think Phantasmaclasm's honestly kind of busted, to be honest. Every time I see it play, I'm like, how is this legal? Like, why does Illusionist have access to this? It's overrated and it's disruptive on the deck that puts a damage check on its opponents. Wait, they just have overrate disruption as well? Okay, that's cool, I guess. All right, moving on to blues, also mostly stock standard, but 2 copies of Battlefront Bastion in blue over here. Is that more Dio tech and Aurora tech, I guess, to some extent?
Yeah, that's one that I guess others in the Canadian group, I actually wasn't as big on it. I think I'm not actually that big on it. I'm not sure that I will end up registering. Definitely, I don't think I will end up registering 3. I might even end up registering 0 copies. I wanted to try it. I think it's I can see merit in it. That kind of hanging damage when you need to block out a 2 attack. But I think as well, if I go into playing something like that, all you got, then I think there's redundancy in the blocking value on those cards. So yeah, I think what I probably want in that slot is either another aura or a more proactive blue, because non-proactive blues, particularly in the mirror and against decks that just take the turn off to set up against you, can be absolutely punishing, and this is another one of them. So yeah.
Makes sense. A couple of copies of Dense Blue Mist as well. Now, a lot of Enigmas have started teching for this as their answer to Dio, alongside the Footsteps. Is there any other matchup you bring Dense Blue Mist in, aside from Dio?
I don't think so.
Just, yeah. Makes sense.
It might be fine against Aurora. I think but I'm not super excited about it. Yeah, I think it's fine against Aurora. But yeah, mostly not as much.
Actually, while we're on that topic, it combos very well with the Footsteps, right? It gives you something else to pitch to on the Footsteps turn. And I'm noticing in your sideboard, you don't actually have Meridian Pathway. So you're bringing Footsteps in most matchups. And you have Stilettos there, but you already have AB in the arm, so I'm guessing Stilettos just a wizard thing. So if you bring Footsteps into most matchups, like, say, Aurora, does Dense Blue Mist have a place there?
If I am bringing Footsteps in against them? Yeah, I think so. I think I would end up playing there because it just utilizes your resources well, right? Along with Waning Vengeances and stuff like that. I think the only thing is that I think you're not fatiguing Aurora, right? You're trying to kill them. So Dense Blue Mist isn't a card that kills them, but it might be a card that helps you bridge the gap and helps you flip cheese and things like that. So I think for that reason, particularly the flipping cheese against Aurora, I think it probably is going to be an answer. I think you can't. I don't think you can play 3 of that card. Because I think if you're at 3, it's definitely, the third one's definitely only for IO, and even then, it can be an absolute brick sometimes. And if you, ever draw 2 or 2 plus chi, and they're on Boom Grenade turn, and you're just, this is so
bad. So actually, on that note, just going to pivot back to equipment real quick. Why no Meridian Pathway?
I think Meridian Pathway is that's probably closest to Nyx being included. I think obviously got the Mage Master boots taking up and I've gone with the Crown of Reflection. I'm restricting some amount of Wizard, but maybe honestly the Crown of Reflection just gets cut because I don't think that now that card is useful outside of that matchup. So could see cutting Crown and just going back to Meridian. I think. In my current plan, if I'm playing Dense Blue Mist, though, I'm going to play Footsteps into IO. I'm not going to play Meridian Pathway. So Meridian Pathway becomes basically for Aurora if I'm not going to play Dense Blue Mist in the matchup and for things like Viserai. But actually, honestly, I think that the Silent Stilettos for AB2 so that you can crack your arms to try and set up a good turn against Viserai might be correct anyway. So trying to weigh that up at the moment.
Last thing I want to talk about in your blues is 2 copies of Truce. Now, what is this doing here? You already have so much setup. So, I know other people have Truce for the potential turn 0 high roll, but you're an Enigma. You already have all these auras. So what's this doing here?
It's the Pablo Pinto tech, right? It's the. I think you need proactive blues that can help you advance the game state and don't deal damage because in a lot of matchups you aren't, well, not a lot of matchups, particularly Dash IO, you're not interested in necessarily dealing the damage. So what you're more interested in is the 3 life or the card, right? So I think 3 is probably bad. I think 0 to 2 is probably the correct number. Where that lands, it depends on which other blues. If I for instance, if I talk about some of the other blues that are maybe interesting to me, I think like blue Spears of Reality from a damage side is interesting. I think the second tenant of Chi Wind is also interesting from that side as a proactive transcender that lets you kind of extend your hand. So even things like Big Blue Sky and Cosmic Awakening, there's other cards that could be in that slot. So yeah, still I'd say most of I really like Blue Sift. I think that is a proactive blue that helps you on all sides, whether you're trying to find defensive or offensive pieces. So I think Blue Sift as a 3 of is pretty easy. But Truce and Heart and Battlefield Bastion are the cards I'm on the fence on when it comes to blues right now.
As a new player, I really hope you play second tenor Chi Wind and also bring it against me. I'd really appreciate that. That'll be awesome.
Definitely.
Yeah. So let's move on and talk about just a couple exclusions. And honestly, the main one that sticks out to me is Red Waxing Spectre.
Yes.
So we spoke a lot about Mirror, and just having Go again on as many of your cards in the Mirror is very, very effective. But that card is missing from your list. And yeah, just talk to me about that one. Like, why was it not good enough to make the cut?
I think it's just not as good as, if I think that 10k is this kind of insane mirror breaker that you can play, I think you then have to be on 3 Spectral Manifestation. You have to be on the extra Astral Etchings to a degree, especially with how good I think Restless is, all the kind of synergies there. And then I think Waxing Spectre is just kind of the card that has to give way, I think. I just don't think you can fit all of this in, because I do think that really is only a mirror / proactive card. Yeah, and it doesn't interact as well with Reality Refractor if you're going to play that plan as manifestation. So I just think it just naturally has to be the card that you kind of. I have liked it in testing though. I actually really like the Waxing Spectre in more the Count Your Blessings build for the mirror, where you don't maybe have access to 10k because you can't fit all these things in, and you can also still play it into other matchups where you need to be proactive. Maybe something like Nu, for instance. So I think there is merit to that card, but yeah, doesn't make it.
Yeah, the Reality Refractor part of it definitely makes a lot of sense. Like, Waning Vengeance fits the cost curve perfectly, right? The Vengeance have 2 floating swing, but Waxing Spectre not so much. I think that makes a lot of sense. So that's all the questions that I had about this list. Was there anything else you wanted to bring up, anything spicy that I might have missed?
No.
Or any other considerations?
I think we're going to quickly talk probably about my Audible choice. Last things I will say around, I guess I'm probably, if I had to gauge right now, I'm around like 70 to 80% to play this list, or something very, very similar, probably in the 75 to 76 cards similar, kind of, or 73 to 75 cards similarity. There is, I would say, a small chance that just based on how the meta shakes out, like if I think IO is more in line to 13, 14, 15, even 16%, and this Aurora is not going to be the second most played aggro deck, there's a chance I swap to Count Your Blessings, I think, because I think Count Your Blessings good, very good into Dash.io, terrible into Aurora, I think, especially if they show up with any grave keepings, which I expect people to do, to be ready for that.
Or Poison the Well.
Yeah, Poison the Well. Whatever your choice of tech is, just 1 or 2 pieces of tech is enough, I think, with your Flicker Wisp, Arc Lightning setups. And then depending on where I think the mirror shakes out, I think one thing I need to test still is, can I fit the mirror plans that I think are good enough to win the mirror and still play Count Your Blessings? And if those 2 things line up, the IO growth and that plan shakes out, I could see myself playing Count Your Blessing. But the other option, which I'm sure you're about to ask about, is to completely pivot away and play Pankaj. What am I playing if I pivot?
Dash.io, apparently a completely different hero and strategy compared to the Enigma over here. So I've got Hayden's Dash.io list pulled up as well, and we won't spend as much time on this as briefly. He's just on like 25% to play this hero. But yeah, let's just start with the high level again. Why Dash.io? Why? How is this the other choice when the first choice is, the grindy Enigma list?
So I'm not playing Enigma because of the particular playstyle, honestly. Like, I think I spoke at the start, I've not found something that necessarily really resonates with me. So instead I've decided to play something that I think is just going to give me the best chance to do well. And I've played a decent number of reps on over the testing period. Dash.io. So I think the decks that were kind of, in the end of the day, down to consideration for me were Enigma, Aurora, Viserai, Dash.io, and a little bit of Zen and Dash.ie, but I put those away fairly well. I keep coming back to them, but they had to go away. They weren't strong enough.
Yeah.
Aurora, I think, is a honestly, had I had more time to explore, might have been a hero that I considered a lot more. I think I'm just not particularly happy with. I just think you're a little bit limited in your card choices in Aurora at the moment, and I think there's a lot more exploring to be done within Aurora and what that deck could look like, which I didn't quite get to. So I think Dash.io though is very, very powerful. I think basically where I land at is if I think that Aurora is going to be by far and away the second most played deck and the most preferred aggro deck in the format to counter Enigma, and Enigmas are trying to adjust by dropping their Count Your Blessings and trying to adapt, then I think Dash.io that doesn't have to deal with Count Your Blessings Enigma and gets to deal with Aurora as well, and potentially like Viscerize, for instance, over Florian's is a very, very good place to be. And so basically that's why it's my audible, I guess.
We spoke about this, yeah. Dash.io does feel like the faster aggro deck within the aggro mirrors, right? So we're expecting a whole bunch of other aggro decks just be on the best one. But she has things she needs to solve for, which is the Enigmas and the non-aggro decks. So with that, I just have a couple of quick questions about this list. The first one, very massive exclusion that's just staring me in the face. No red boom grenade. Let's talk about that one. Why do you hate this one? Because I know a lot of Dash.ios are on the 9 boom grenade train, for example. Some people think that's the entire game plan. And most lists, I think, are on the reds at the minimum, if not on the full 6 or 9. So
yeah,
you're on 6, but not on the reds.
Yeah, yellow and blue. So take a step back, right? I think there's my philosophy, and I think some others would have come to this right now, is that there's obviously the 2 distinct builds, like we said, of Enigma, but I also think there's 2 theories on how you can play out Dash.io right now. You can go 100% balls to the wall, 9 boom grenade, all your best boost cards, and just do the thing as consistently as you possibly can, and your deck is a pure resource, right? And then you can maybe try and come up with a fatigue plan in that, maybe, but finding enough spots for that is going to be really, really tough, I think. There is the other element where people are trying things like system reset and all these kind of like much more setup-y stuff, really trying to, I guess, not get fatigued, worried that fatigue is really going to show up as the main kind of counter to IO. I would say IO has not performed through the first week of ProQuest maybe as people, or certainly what I expected. I think people also started to see the weaknesses and the chinks in the armor of Dash.io, and I think people are coming down on the expected number of Dash.ios, and I think people might start to cut away from these strategies that are more fatigue-orientated to counter Dash.io, because Aurora is looking like the best aggro deck, like I said before, right? So I think what opens up is this kind of mid-ground where, yes, you have a bit of a plan to deal with some amount of, fatigue or fatigue by blocking, and rather than people being necessarily set up to purely fatigue you and disrupt you, but more fatigue by blocking or having a few disruption elements, which we can talk about. But then also at the same time being able to just not sacrifice your aggro matchup, potentially, or be worse against aggro or the mirror, like some of these more system resets setup kind of decks are. So I think that's basically where I landed on. I think Boom Grenade falls into that more kind of column A, and I want to be more in column B, which is this kind of somewhat in between. I also just found when I played Dash.io last time, prior to even Armory deck, that I just didn't love just how bricky the red boom grenades can be. I want to always be able to pitch my boom grenades because they're just terrible from hand. Absolutely terrible.
I think that makes sense. Red Boom Grenade does feel like a bit more of a win more in the aggro races, but if you're already winning it, do you really need to win more on that front? It's like if you're already positive. Whereas the Red Boom Grenades, when they don't land into non-aggro matchups, it just feels so terrible. So yeah, I can totally see that. Now, even if you do switch to Dash.io, you're still expecting a lot of Enigma to be in the room. So what is your solution to Enigma, or rather more broadly, what is the solution that you found for the fatigue decks, or the decks that can block very well, and can either set up on their turn when you take the setup turn, and like Enigma can gain life in the form of ward, or say something like new that's going to disrupt you as well, or Florian that might disrupt you. Well, what's the solution you found for those slower matchups?
I think there's a lot of different solutions you can go with. We were talking before jumping on the pod about the hyper scrapper kind of plan with like conviction amplifier, and you can have this big kind of like dominated in game, for instance. Plasma mainline is one we spoke about in the pod last week that's really come up. I really like that card. Prismatic lens, for instance, is another one people are going to. I think basically the true count your blessings fatigue deck, I actually just don't think you can. I think you can do all the setup in the world that you want, but they're going to gain a bunch of life while you're doing that. The way to beat that, like we said before, is be as aggressive as possible. So I'm going to flip the coin and just say I'm probably going to lose to Count Your Blessings Enigmas. And instead, what I'm going to go for is much more proactive plan using penetration script and plasma mainline to have somewhat of damage density. So trying to have 3 turns of penetration script, which can get you up to 10 damage out of a single card, right? That's what I'm more looking for. Plasma mainline, which is going to help. One card that's going to help buff, 2 extra resources of Teklo Core, an extra 2 damage off Teklo Pounder, for instance, another turn of Cerebellum Processor. I think that is the way to go. I have 1 Hyper Scrapper in there as well for, again, I'm just looking at pure damage density as the way to beat decks that are going to try and outlast you. And I think that helps you get through maybe a bit of a mid-draw against a deck that could pivot to Fatigue as well. So that's where I've landed. But yeah, I think people are on a spectrum of... Don't worry about Fatigue all the way to I've got every plan for Fatigue in the world. But yeah, it's all comes at a cost.
Yeah, and you're somewhere in the middle, which I think makes a lot of sense as well, and can definitely see the trend that you have got going on, where you just want to avoid as many of the red items as possible, like playing the red boom grenades, and stuff playing like some of the red options in the anti-fatigue slot, like the convection amplifier, or even the what's that other? The other script, I forget what it's called, but the one that puts a -1 -1 on the defense value of all of them.
MHZ like or something, is it? I can't remember what that one's called.
I don't completely remember the name. Yeah. But yeah, yellow, blue boom grenades, yellow pen script as well.
Yeah.
Chips when it comes in yellow. So it's very much trying to minimize the number of bricks from holding a red item, which also helps you in aggro races and does exactly what you're trying to accomplish, which is just have as much damage as possible turn after turn. The spiky damage, but more consistent damage, I think makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Yeah, and the last thing I probably want to say, just to shout out, is that I haven't done a lot of work on Dash.io. I've been leaning on those that I've been testing with, particularly Dan Mackay and Tom Dowling, who is obviously a Dash aficionado, second place at Calling Melbourne, breakout of the OG Dash.io guy, and similar for I've played a lot more Enigma than Dash.io, but there's been a lot of people that have taken different ideas from and tried to synthesize. There's a lot of people that you'll see this weekend that are playing Enigma from across like the wider testing group that as the kind of PCG Invasion team, but also again Dan Mackay and a few others as well. So yeah, shout outs to everyone who's either provided ideas I've been able to snatch ideas from, or been able to at least kind of test into and work out my own ideas, which has probably been lesser this time than maybe other times, to be honest. Some of my ideas have just flat not worked out this time. I've thrown a lot of things at the format, and a lot of them have not. I mean, at one point, my testing partners can attest to this, I was trying to like fatigue IO with KO and then still swap into like a proactive plan for Enigma. I had a Kasai list that I sent out, and people told me, just honestly, we're not testing into, don't even bother. So it's been a roller coaster.
Oh, I'm no stranger to definitely to cooking up some wild lists that have no business being brewed at all, and then forcing my testing partners to play against me. I had a Pommel Redback Shroud Azuri at some point.
People put up with us, right?
Try and play as a coping. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's about it. I think we've said what we want to talk about both your lists, and wish you all the luck in your upcoming days. I mean, when people are listening to this, you're already going to be in the middle.
Yeah, probably dropped,
of your first day of the World Championships. So no, you'll be in the middle of your undefeated streak.
Exactly.
So yeah, all the best for that one.
It's happening. No, thank you, and yeah, good to chat through. Always the hard-hitting questions, Pankaj, but we're going to be, but as I say, by the time this pod drops, you'll be casting, I'll be playing. Look forward to seeing what I actually eventually end up on from a list perspective. I'd say there's like a 5% chance that I don't play either of these decks, but I think it's getting...
obviously.
Of course, but I think it's getting less and less. But I think if there was anything at this point, it would be me panicking and playing Aurora for some reason that I don't yet can't articulate. I don't know. I don't think there's anything else that I could possibly see myself playing at this point, honestly. There's no chance I'm playing something like Kano. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, that's been episode 185 of Arsenal Pass. I want to shout out to all the Arsenal Pass patrons. If you want to follow either myself or Pankaj on X, you can do so at Ethnic Smoke over here or at Fian_Dale. And until next time, we'll see you in the next pod.